Good evening. Good evening, colleagues, friends, students. Welcome to the 2024 Artifact Reading. My name is Heidi McPherson. I'm honored to serve as president of SUNY Brockport. I'm so grateful to be here tonight in front of you at the Rochester Educational Opportunity Center, which is also home to Brockport downtown. The REOC is one of my favorite places in the city because of the role it plays in building meaningful lives and vibrant communities. And my thanks go to Executive Director Roosevelt Marius for offering this venue for our use. The Artifact Reading recognizes excellence in literary nonfiction. It is part of the university's long-standing Writers' Forum, which has been bringing world-renowned writers to the greater Rochester area for more than 50 years. We've had the distinct honor of hosting Nobel laureates such as Derek Walcott, Pulitzer Prize winners such as Sharon Olds and Edward P. Jones, and U.S. poet laureates such as Natasha Trethewey. In addition, the Writers' Forum also provides a platform for emerging writers from a broad range of backgrounds and disciplines, and I am so grateful that this wonderful series continues to be a tremendous resource for our community. It is truly a privilege to hear from the range of authors who have presented the Artifact Readings over the past several years. They have exposed us to different worlds and different experiences. Recently, we've heard from Danny Shapiro, Barry Lopez, Gerald Walker, and Steve Majors. Their readings have offered us the brilliance of excellent writing and the opportunity to think anew about a range of topics. Tonight, we are joined by Eric Gansworth, an award-winning Onondaga writer who is the author of many novels, including Mending Skins and Extra Indians. I'm looking forward to hearing from him tonight. And at this time, I'd like to ask Professor Jim Wharton, Director of the Writers' Forum, to come forward and properly introduce tonight's speaker.
Again, thank you all for being here. I'm so glad to have every one of you in the building with us tonight, and I'm also glad to have those of you with us who are watching the live stream. I want to quickly thank a few particular supporters without whom the Artifact Reading would not happen. President McPherson, a stalwart supporter for many years in many ways of the Brockport Writers' Forum, and we look forward to her debut collection of poems due out this summer. Thanks also to our supporters Ralph Black, Madeline Cherwanik, Dave Mihalov, and Stan Rubin. Thank you to the Brockport Downtown crew, and thanks very much to our video crew, Mike Smith and Jenny Orzel, who are sending this program out into the world tonight, both with the Department of Journalism and Broadcasting at SUNY Brockport. Thanks to John Bonzik over here from Liftbridge Books. You'll know them from the village of Brockport on Main Street. John has copies of many of Eric's books for sale right here. So after the reading, after Eric reads, we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll have time for a book signing at the end of the evening. So stick around. There's no need to run off. Let's visit and hang out for a while. Finally, there's actually one other person I want to thank, and that's Sharon Lubkeman Allen for incorporating, Sharon's in here somewhere. Hey, Sharon. For building this Artifact Reading and Eric Gansworth's visit into the annual graduate student conference that we host every year at SUNY Brockport called Segway. So some of you are joining us online as part of this conference. All day Saturday from 9 to 4:15 on the Brockport campus and online, we'll be talking about books and talking about stories and talking about Eric Gansworth's work. The quick way to get the details on this program is on the Segway poster that's on that column over there. There's a little box called a QR code. And if you hold your phone up to that and take a picture of it, it will give you the links to join any of those sessions, either in person or by Zoom. So you're all invited, no need to register. Finally, before I sit down, I want to thank Eric Gansworth for expanding my sense of what it means for me personally to live here where I do live, south of Lake Ontario, near the Genesee River. I'm not originally from this part of the world, and I've only very slowly begun to understand that first, two things. First, this was the territory of the Haudenosaunee people long before I came here, and second, that they're still here, living and working and making art. Eric Gansworth is a writer and visual artist and enrolled member of the Onondaga Nation. He was raised at the Tuscarora Nation near Niagara Falls, and he's currently a professor of English and the Lowry Writer-in-Residence at Canisius College in Buffalo. His paintings have appeared in shows at the Niagara Arts and Culture Center, Colgate University, the Iroquois Indian Museum, and many other galleries and colleges. And his paintings also appear in his books, of which he's published many. 4 novels, most recently My Good Man, 3 collections of poems, 2 YA novels, and other work including a play and an anthology that he edited, Sovereign Bones, an anthology of creative nonfiction from Indigenous writers and artists. His memoir in verse, Apple Skin to the Core, won the American Library Association's Prince Award for Excellence in Young Adult Literature, and it was longlisted for the 2020 National Book Award. Welcome, Eric Gansworth.
Thanks, Jim. Good evening. How are y'all? Thank you thank you for answering that. Usually people just sort of stare blankly. They're never sure whether they should say anything or not. I'm going to put my watch here so I can kind of keep track of the time. It's a Watchman watch for anybody who's kind of a pop culture person. I thought what I might do is talk a little bit about this book and its origin, and then I'd read some selections from it, and open it up to questions, and then I'll finish with one final poem. Today's my sister's birthday, and so the final poem is it's about her partly, and I'll kind of talk about that when we get there. So technically, this is a YA book. I mean, it has won some YA awards, but it's kind of really not. I guess it is in that the large focuses of it are on one's younger years, but it's not entirely that. But I did kind of want to acknowledge something even before we go in there. The Writers Forum in SUNY Brockport plays like a major role in my writing career in really weird ways that I'm not sure I've ever talked about, in ways that I haven't even necessarily thought of. So when I was a kid, somebody from my community, and this was like very rare back then, this is in 1976, wrote a book. His name is Ted C. Williams, and I'll be reading a poem that includes him a little bit later tonight. And it's called The Reservation, and it was published by Syracuse University Press. And I had the opportunity to hear him talk about it a number of times, while he was still alive. But the book itself has its origins in Ted's time here. He was in a class with a faculty member named Peter Marchant, and he showed the first, what would become the earliest chapters of The Reservation to his professor, who said these tremendous words of encouragement to him, and said, you really keep going, and you have more stories in you than all of us put together. And that was kind of enough for Ted to go forward and write this book, which ultimately was the book that helped me understand it was even possible for somebody from my community to do such a thing. Like, it would not have occurred to me that this was possible. And so you kind of never know where the seeds come from for almost anything, but I do know where some of the very specific seeds are for my work, and so that's one of them. Another is that I started college in kind of an unusual way. I went to a community college, in part because I was working in a junkyard, and it was getting to be November. And I thought, I don't really want to do this come January. And I had asked my guidance counselor about college, and he said, not everybody's college material. And because I respected the people who were working in my school, I kind of believed him, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess maybe that's me. And so I just kind of went on, and one of the things that happens, and if you've gone to college, you are the people who disappeared, but if you're the people still home, you see all of your friends disappearing one by one, and you're thinking, wait, what's going on here? And I suppose I have to get on with life. And because I didn't take the SAT on the not advice of my guidance counselor, I wound up at this community college. Niagara County Community College, and it was a tremendous education. It was incredibly valuable. But I took a creative writing class. I had already started writing on my own, but I learned really to write poetry by listening to rock lyrics. I mean, I did not know the name of any contemporary poet at the time. It was just not a part of my life. And as you can see, I'm wearing like a Rush jacket right now, which is super nerdy, unless you're a Rush fan, in which case it's awesome. And you can decide where you fall on that line. But so I thought, well, I want to get serious about this. I want to do this for real. And I was in a medical technology program at the time. So being able to squeeze in any kind of humanities class was like remarkable, because I was doing clinical work 8 hours a day, 2 days a week. And so I was working literally in a hospital. And so I got into this creative writing class, and the faculty member, E.R. Baxter III, showed us contemporary poets, and most of us had not encountered these people before. And what he had brought, he wheeled in a gigantic VCR of a size I had never seen before. They were not a regular VCR. They had like these enormous tapes that were about this big. And but they were early recordings from the Writers' Forum. And so I saw James Dickey being interviewed and reading, and Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And I dismissed them all because I knew better. I was like, who are these people and what do they think they're doing? And yet they stayed. They stayed in my memory enough for me to go back and re-witness them when I became a better reader. And so were it not for those early experiences and discovering what you could do in narrative poetry and sort of what that meant in the second half of the 20th century, who knows what my work would look like? Probably something very sad. Because one of the bad things about rock lyrics is they need the music. They're just not all that great poems. And so that was kind of what I was doing. So I really appreciate Jim Wharton's invitation to come back. I was very thrilled to be here in 2001. It was October 2001, so the world was in kind of a complex place in the way it is again. But I think one of the things you try to do is, or at least I have tried to do, is to make art to make sense of the world. And that was really part of how this book came about. I've been writing off and on fiction and poetry, like trading back and forth through most of my career. And I had written 2 novels that were published, and I really wanted to get back to poetry, and I had, kind of a partially finished manuscript, but it did not seem that there was such a thing as poetry for young adults. I didn't see any. And I asked my editor, I was like, is that a thing? And he said, well, there's memoirs in verse or novels in verse. Might you be interested in doing that? And my answer was no. I didn't really want to learn a new form all over again. But it turned out that I eventually had the opportunity to show him some of my work, and he said, oh, you're already doing this. And he also showed me a couple of memoirs in verse, and I had to agree. I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing. I didn't even know that I had already kind of arrived at that form. But one of the things I also do and have kind of as a signature in being a writer is I'm a little bit of a provocateur. Not a really big provocateur, but a little bit. And I had written this piece, and I kind of gauge audience response. So if you're yawning, I'll try to like speed it up at some point, and and if you're too animated, I might back down some. But I listened for audience response, and I had written this piece, and it was being performed by others, and I made a joke about an apple in the middle of it, and it was in New York City, and so I thought like what might be the most receptive audience to an edgy joke, and they weren't. Like, it was just totally silent, and I thought, oh, this is like touching a nerve for these people, which of course made me think I have to poke that nerve some more. And so I got to thinking about what it meant and why I made the joke in the first place. So if you're unfamiliar with what an apple is, it's a slang term. It's used in Indian communities, mostly like intra-Indian slang. And it means being red on the outside, white on the inside. So it means you've kind of adopted the larger world too much. And I'm an educator. That's what I do for a living. And I'm also, a writer. And so I thought, well, of course, that's the world I engage. And so I thought, nobody has called me this to my face. is it possible people have said this about me behind my back? And it's not only possible, it's most likely. And usually my community is kind of confrontational, so I'm sort of surprised it hasn't happened right up front. But I kind of kept exploring it and what it meant to make that decision and why it was such an important slang that nobody would be willing to laugh in this entire auditorium full of people because they didn't want to be tied to laughing about it. And it really goes back to this idea of education. So Indian education has always been fraught, and much of the work in this book, as a memoir, comes from the reality that 3 of my 4 grandparents were sent off to Indian boarding schools. And I didn't even necessarily know about this in my younger life. I didn't really discover all the broad-ranging implications of it until much later. 2 had gone to Carlisle, and 1 went to Hampton. And so if you're unfamiliar with what a boarding school is, its main mission was to, literally their tagline was kill the Indian, save the man. So it was about wiping out indigenous identity altogether. And so they brought students there and kind of kept them for as long as it took for them to not only be well versed in American life, but to be incompatible with their communities if they came home. And so I had these 3 grandparents who very bravely not only went, but chose to come home and to see us all into the world. So this is maybe like the most explicit poem. I mean, it's not vulgar, but it's just fairly direct in the work. And also because I am a faculty member, I kind of wanted to name this poem sort of dorkily, like a lot of the textbooks we get. So this is Boarding School Philosophy, Shorter Simplified Edition. Practical application. Only people who are faculty members will laugh at that joke because it's the kind of book where you either have a text that's about this thick or the shorter simplified version, which is like this thick. Problem. Indians and communities will reproduce in both form and idea. If offspring cannot be stopped, disrupt culture. Solution 1. Kill them all, or remove all available food sources. Solution 2, destabilize group identity by making group land base illegal. Solution 3, where land base exists, sterilize fertile adults under the guise of current, helpful medical care until they vanish on their own, unaware. Solution 4, remove present juvenile offspring, incarcerate them long enough to open possibilities for future manual labor resources. To minimize bloodshed, call incarceration institution a school. Convince parents it is an opportunity of a lifetime for juvenile offspring. If students attempt to return, and they will, and attempt to procreate with their own kind, and they will, the remnants of their culture will be so small, so fragmented, they will have no choice but to build new lives drawn from the available current American cultural resources. Optimally, within 2 generations, those slivers of their old cultures will be so small they cannot thrive, and assimilation will be complete. Uncontrollable variables, those who decline the opportunity of incarceration, the presence of mirrors and the capacity for insight. Long-range plan, repeat as necessary, revisit in 2 generations' time, adjust accordingly. So that's like the big downer poem to begin with. This is a poem called Eel. I'm a member of the Eel clan. And some of these are a little bit longer. I guess I'm probably, because I write fiction and poetry, my fiction is probably a little bit too poetic and my poems are a little bit too talky. This is one of the talky ones. And it's really about coming to understanding of this, of the clan system, and even what an eel was. So it's tracing back all the way to kindergarten and then going forward from there. Eel. 1. In kindergarten, I failed to understand the prompt, draw your clan. My clan name lives in my brain, 3-letter abstraction. A helpful friend trying suggests it's like his clan, minus legs. The rest of the day, I believe my clan is a species of amputee snipes, birds forced to sky forever, forbidden from land, symbol of endurance or disfigurement. My mother explains, we are not legless birds, mutants. If she'd had a better education, she would have known the word ambiguous. Not quite fish, more than snake, but settling into her limitations, she says, we are among the few. The Marines, I think? The last Tuscarora eel died a generation ago, so we are left Onondaga eels among the Tuscarora. Opinions dismissed by politics of representation, voices silenced in air and water. 3. An encyclopedia photograph, not cast in Curtis's sepia, offers jagged rows of razor teeth, set in a mouth perpetually grinning, shimmering, undulating sides, a long crest of dorsal fin defining the spine. Nothing I've seen in any mirror. She explains vaguely, our clan belongs to a system tracking families. And when I probe further, she says, we remember them so we don't accidentally fall in love, marry our relatives, ending by asserting we have no more affinity with eels than the rest of the reservation. 4. If I threw you in the dike, she adds, you would drown as fast as anyone else. And I remember older cousins swimming beneath me, surprise attacking between my legs, and suddenly I rise, their hands grabbing my knees as my balls collide with the backs of their necks, and they break waves, toss me through air into deeper water, probably watching to make sure I surface, but only after some laughter while I struggle toward light. 5. In new, wet darkness, I imagine my own secret origin, taking water in, growing heavy and cold, swapping air in my lungs for another element, discovering gills like Aquaman or Namor the Submariner, turning inward, swallowing my tail, infinite aquatic Ouroboros, knowing I had better odds of dying face down, no voice to call for help. I am never quite brave enough to try, not daring even to open my eyes when my face has broken the stillness of river water contained. 6. Every now and then I flip on my back, close my eyes, ears below the surface, listening to mysteries there, breathe shallowly, stay at that level and float. Wonder what it would be to glide through darkness, knowing if I were there, I would desire legs and lungs, and then I fill my chest to capacity, turn and dive, loving and begrudging the ache I find, throbbing in my rib cage, begging for release, and I swim back up, eyes still closed, wondering how long it will take to find the surface again. I think that's a long poem. I think I'm going to skip it. Do y'all a favor? I'm going to read a few that all are kind of connected to one another. So I think one of the things that happens in a community this size, it's about 1,000 people, and maybe I want to say, don't quote me, 10 different families, and so they're all living in this like 5 by 7 mile place. As such, you kind of learn to get along for life, you know, because most people aren't moving away from there. And so, like, if you have an enemy, do you really want that enemy for, you know, for however many years you're alive? And so you really learn the art of negotiation in some meaningful ways. But you also have to find those people who are compatible with you, you know, the people who share your taste, your interest. And there's a figure who appears here numerous times in the set of poems. And I've given her a different name. It's a nickname that we kind of came up with accidentally. It's not her real name, so. But they're all about the cross-section between her life and mine through much of our younger years. How Jabuzi and I almost lose it. We have known each other most of our lives because our families are entwined in ways too complex for anyone outside the res to fully understand. Let's just say neither of us can remember, but know it was always inevitable. We are 2 years apart, which can seem like a canyon in elementary school, but when two people live in such a tiny community who both love books and who both have a knack of asking questions that piss others off, they would be bound to find each other, even if family ties hadn't made it inevitable. Over years, we sometimes get left behind or are told to stay because we're not wild enough, though we have both refused to back down to liars who thought they could intimidate us into silence. Every year, the swamp deep in the res burns, and we never know if someone has said it or if it's an act of God. Because we both live in century-old houses, we have a vested interest in the story when it flares up late every August, just before school starts, and lingers stronger and weaker deep into September, an asthmatic dragon hiding out in the res's southern woods. Guys go by the truckload, hanging out open beds and open windows, and we have never seen it up close and in person, only the long wall of rising smoke announcing that year's major fire before the sirens blow for volunteers. The year she graduates, we decide to chase the smoke for once and see the flames for ourselves firsthand. We start on the path we have used our whole lives to get to and from each other's houses, and then step deeper into the canopy of trees and brush, crash through the green ocean of 1,000 umbrellas planted blooming in the gloom as if there were no such thing as the sun. Coming upon the fire, we feel let down, somehow expecting swampy flames to look different. Because of the way everyone says it's too dangerous to be in, we walk right in, feel the heat through our jeans and sneakers, hear individual pops and cracks as dry wood flashes and burns to the core, instead of the dull, distant roar that usually accompanies the southern glow, like an aurora that has lost its way. We ignite the ends of dead branches and write fleeting bright orange ember messages in the blue sky, heat burning and fading on our retinas like flashbulbs. Growing bored, we discover the danger no one has shared the details of, assuming we'd never be stupid or brave enough to ignore their warnings or take their word. The fire has surrounded us, like we are singers for a giant blast furnace round dance of flame and smoke. The sky above us darkens like an eclipse, and the air lung punches us for cockiness. She says that, as always, I should have listened to her before. 2 years earlier, she tried talking me into joining track with her, the easiest sport to let her in. She knew the rest of our schoolmates branded kids from the res as lesser, sensing it even when people denied those opinions to our faces. Track was one of her many workaround ideas. She figured the years we bolted from the relentless Dog Street dogs would make us naturals, and then we'd fit in. For a week, I'd forgotten that I hate sports, and that if given the chance between a leather jacket and a leather one, I'd go with the gleaming black cowhide every time. Some things don't change. Now, fire pursuing us, crouching in the starting position, she gives me the face of "I told you so," followed by "Mark, get set, go." And we charge the flames. We raise our legs, trying not to hit the burning hurdles, close our eyes, and hold our breaths, hoping the wall of flame is not as deep as it seems, wishing we'd each thought to invest our summer job money in better sneakers that were more flame resistant. Of course, because you're listening to me at this moment, you know we made it. What you don't know is that we land only partway through the flames. melting our souls, some as we bolt blindly the rest of the way, breaking through to the other side. What you don't know is that we could have been wrong, that we were just lucky. Streaked in smoke, we shiver in the close call and walk home, never looking back to see if that swamp fire liked the taste it got. What you don't know is that after a while, shaking can seem like laughter if you want it to. And by the time we emerged, still trembling from the bush line and saw familiar houses, this was what we told anyone who asked. And this is what we also tell ourselves. We had just experienced the best joke, but it's an inside joke, and you had to be there. We tell ourselves this over and over, but when we each get home, we take off our shoes, see our scarred souls, and know how close we came to losing everything our ancestors fought for. And man, they'd be pissed when we eventually arrived in the sky world. We might even get a rare slap. But we were lucky enough that the scolding we'll get beyond the star path should be years and years from now. And if we just smarten up, and I guess that's why Jabuzi applied for financial aid. She's taken the SATs, and she's leaving for college in a couple of weeks, getting ready to move into a dorm a few miles or a few million miles from the res. They seem the same, taking enough belongings to stay a good long while. So this is the poem talking about Ted Williams in his book. And again, my encounter with the book came not just from Ted, but also the first time I was able to read a copy. I borrowed Jabuzi's copy. Jabuzi passes me the book. Because she's moved in to our family solar system, confirming the love of her life 2 doors down, we see each other all the time, maybe even more than she or my cousin would like sometimes. We are leaning on the car, waiting for my cousin, getting cleaned up after a long day roofing. His car windows are wide open, keys in the ignition, because this is the res. I notice the reservation resting on the passenger side. And by this, I mean the book by Ted C. Williams. The actual res never rests, but this book lies dormant fairly often. One of my half-assed cousins, the maybe blood-related, maybe not kind, Ted had left the res long before I was born, but came home to visit often enough. And the summer I was 11, he made res news by publishing this book, creating excitement in some and hostility in others. At that age, the idea of reading for pleasure had never occurred to me. Many households around the res have a copy somewhere, but I didn't think I knew anyone who had read the whole thing. Jabuzi is in college and says she has enough to read, but her man, my cousin, is reading it a little at a time, maybe on his lunch break. 2 of my uncles were named fleetingly in its 200 pages, and I reach into the car window, flip through pages to see if I can spot their names. Of course, I'm not looking for their legal names, since no one uses those, but their res names, and I spot one, transported back to some of the old houses already gone. Think of elders already gone, still alive on these pages. I keep reading until my cousin comes out and we head to the city, seeking whatever trouble we prowl for that particular night. Back through our border, I ask my cousin if I can borrow the book for a couple of days. He says it will take longer than that. But by 16, I've been reading for pleasure, maybe 3 years. I cover half the night and the rest the next evening, staying home. I ask my mom if she remembers an event Ted described, and she says she remembers the truth instead. I understand now why so many people have this book, but so few have read it. They wanted Ted to use their mirror, but he peered in his own instead. And his was long and wide, and the mercury on its back surface shone clear, and maybe its imperfections were ones he knew best because they were his own. He rearranged people's lives to protect them and celebrate them at the same time. He was writing a history that insiders would understand one way and outsiders another. My mom didn't understand that she wasn't the intended audience, and that the white readers everyone worried about didn't even exist for the most part. The secrets revealed in these pages weren't worth knowing to them. The real secret, the one waiting for me and anyone like me in the future, was the most daring of all. Ted held the mirror up to me, not so I could see him or even myself, but instead so I could grasp our shared world, reshaped in careful, loving words for future Indians neither of us could yet imagine. I'm going to stop there. I want to just mention a couple of things, and I'll open it up for questions, and then I'll close with that one final poem. So this was this is my 12th book, I think, and I knew that when I was going to call it a memoir, that was going to be in trickier territory. So I'm the youngest of a big family. And I can tell you, nobody really wants to be the other members of the family of a writer, because they didn't sign up for this. You know, they suddenly, like, even if it's not true, people are guessing. Like, did this happen to you? Was this you? I think this was you. I think I remember this. And oftentimes they're wrong, but they often insist that they have made this connection. So my siblings have lived with this for a very long time. And their kids as well, and their kids. I'm maybe a little bit closer to their generation because I'm like the mistake kid way at the very end of the family, and so I knew I had this responsibility to them, and so I wrote this is very 21st century. I wrote a text to my entire family, saying, "Hi, the next book I'm doing is going to be a memoir, and if you want to, you can opt out. Just choose to let me know you don't want to be in it, and you won't be in it, I promise." And I said, "But this is your only chance. Like, no other book does this apply to, only this one." And I have to say that there were a couple of surprises, but for the most part, not. And I appreciated that they were very generous with their support, and so it felt okay to finally write something and call it a memoir, and to put things in that I hadn't put before in any other book, and to also, not just about them. I didn't want to just shit talk my family, but also about myself. Even one of the most ridiculous nicknames I have, Pixie, to be truthful. You can see why you might not want that as a 59-year-old guy, but I thought that's probably like a small price compared to what they've been dealing with. But at any rate, so I'll open it for questions, and then I said I'll finish with this one poem, and I'll explain the connection as we get there. Yes? Oh, apparently, since this is being streamed, we have a microphone. Sorry, you're being drafted into using a microphone. Don't be shy.
I love microphones.
Okay, good.
I'm not shy. Hello. First of all, just deep bow and gratitude to you for telling this story and for the land that we're on right now. So deep bow and gratitude for that. But the very first poem you read touched me because now I understand why my great-grandmother didn't allow my grandmother to go to school in the South. And one of the reasons why my granny said is because she said Grandma thought that I would be killed. And Grandma was a native. Grandma was indigenous. Grandma was a Blackfoot Indian with long hair all the way down to her knee. And so that poem just touched me. I don't even really have the words to say or convey how it did, But when you talked about what the goal was for these boarding schools and how your grandparents were able to come back from that and still be their authentic selves is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that was one of the challenges of writing a memoir, and I had to kind of have this conversation with my editor, because he said, I'm not sure you're, sorry, I may be paraphrasing, but he said something like, I'm not sure you quite get the full grasp of memoir. This is like your story. And I'm like, I know, but my story is my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents and my nephews and nieces. And, you know, I said, it's a continuum. I just happen to be in the middle right now. And without the choices they made and the things they faced, I wouldn't be where I am. So they have to be here. So the whole first section of this book is actually my grandparents and their young lives. So, thanks. People so shy at these things. I think probably streaming may amp up the anxiety for folks.
So my question is for your writing, are you a computer person or do you like handwrite on paper?
You know, one of the things when you're a writer, thanks for the interesting question, and it's one that I thought would have been very easy to answer about 5 years ago, because I would have just been computer, and that's the way I compose. And I never learned how to formally type, so I just have my own wacky typing version. But when you are a writer, something that happens is when your friends want to give you gifts, they think a writer would like this. And it's usually like these super nice journals. And I have terrible handwriting for one thing. So I had to learn to kind of write neatly. But mostly I avoided them, and I felt bad. I had like this guilt pile of unused journals. And then this friend was able to kind of triumphantly get me. So he made like this really beautiful David Bowie journal, and it had like a gimmicky cover thing. So when you slid it, like Bowie's eyes opened up, and then when you slid the cover off, they closed again. And so I played around with the cover thing for a while, but I eventually felt, well, I really have to do something with this to kind of honor the gift. And so I started then writing by hand in these journals, this Moleskine. Sorry, not doing a commercial for Moleskine, but they were gorgeous. And it did change the way I write. And I think that it must unlock some very different part of your brain. And so it made me kind of, because I'm paranoid in this way, it made me kind of worried for young people who are texting all the time, because I wonder what's happening to their ability to kind of process what happens when you handwrite. I did an event at a middle school not that long, just before COVID. And the school had bought books for all the kids, and so they were having them signed, and so I was, doing the signing thing, and like they couldn't read my handwriting. I thought, my handwriting's bad, but it's not that bad. And they said, can you read this? Can you read this? And so I thought, what can I consciously do? What's going on here? And the principal said, well, we don't teach them cursive anymore, so they don't know they don't know that's like a wholly different language you're using here. I don't know what the solution is to that, but it was interesting to me to see that there are different processes going on. And so the gifts of those journals that I felt so guilty about, now I kind of like hoard them, and I'm kind of happy that I have the big pile there, because it did change the way I wrote. And I kind of choose what I'm doing by the project. So some things I know that I want to be more deliberate with, I go to the journal, because it takes me longer and I have to be more thoughtful about what I'm doing. Yeah, thanks. I've oddly not ever been asked that question before.
I'll take that from you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. I have to ask this disclaimer. I published a memoir, and I had a sister who didn't talk to me for 2 years.
I was going to say, how did your family feel?
That's my disclaimer. I have to know how many of your relatives, how did they react to your text about, does anybody want to opt out? Like, what happened? You said you have a huge family.
Most just said, cool, that's exciting, yeah, I get it. My one nephew, who I've given a lot of different nicknames to, or I guess we all have, he said, well, I guess you can disguise me in any multiple number of ways. So he was making fun of the, I guess, his place in the family. And so it was nice to see that embrace. But I also wasn't hugely, I knew there were going to be people who didn't want to, because I'm sure if I weren't in control of things, I wouldn't be all that happy if somebody were writing about me. So I understand and was totally fine. I feel bad that those people aren't here, because I have like some really joyous things I would have liked to have said about them, and they're not in there, but I felt to respect their desires was more important. Yeah, it's tough though, and I know other people who have gone through what you just described. Yeah, and I'd rather still be able to talk to my siblings, and so it was kind of the tough question to ask, because I was kind of afraid how if many people said no, what was I going to do? But I was relieved that it was not the case.
I teach creative nonfiction too here at SUNY, and there's a big debate about it, really, just in the whole field, about do you really censor if it's your spin on it, and a big argument that there's no way you should have to ask, but then you have to live with the results. And would you do it again? If you wrote another memoir, would you say, yeah, I pretty much better respect that, or?
Yeah, I'm working slowly on a piece of long-form nonfiction, and yeah, I'll probably ask the question again, and they'll probably say, like, I thought you already did this, or something along those lines. But I feel like that's a base I need to cover, just out of respect for these people I've shared my life with.
Thanks, I understand.
Hi, me again. And thank you so much. I have something to add to that, and then just one little question. So with that, my mom passed away, and my sister and I haven't spoke since. And my mother charged me with writing her story about, living with breast cancer and so on and so forth. But me and my sister don't speak, so she'll definitely probably never speak to me if I wrote my version, my reality of it. So, and we got to talk. I need your advice. So that's that. But you said something so profound, and I've had the best professors that I'm looking at right here that let me color outside of the lines, right? Because I don't like rules. And both of my professors know it. You said you write prose and you write poetry. So your poetry is too talky and your prose is too poetic. Why the disclaimer?
Well, that's not me saying that. That's the feedback I get.
Really? From who?
Editors. Like, well, these poems aren't really poetic enough, and some.
Wow.
And then fiction editors saying, well, you're a little too precious with the lines here. This seems more like poetry than prose, and your work should be in service of the story, not in service of the language. And that's when I realized I was just going to always exist somewhere, like I guess I am the hybrid form.
Yeah, you got me even more free than I already am. So thank you for saying that.
Hi, I just have like a nosy question.
Okay.
I just want to know, like you mentioned that you're working on a few creative pieces. What are you working on? Or are you secretive? Because I know a lot of authors are secretive about
Yeah, I think it's not so much secretive. You're sort of encouraged not to talk about something that's in process. But it's really just, I think most of my work is one large body of work anyway. So it's the intersection of traditional culture and popular culture, which is kind of where I exist very heavily. And so I don't know how not to do that. In some cases, I was rereading this, getting ready for this evening. And it's ruining my new project, because I was like, I already wrote about that. I can't do it again. And so I think you just keep kind of going back to the same things that preoccupy you. And your choice then is to say, all right, can I continue to write about that in a fresh way without repeating what I've already written? So like one of the things I'm working on is an essay piece about the band Kiss. Sorry. And I already wrote about Kiss in this book a couple of times. And like my niece and nephew, I used to watch them. I was their babysitter, and I sort of drafted them into doing Kiss cosplay when we were young. And so that's in here, and so they've already faced that humiliation. And so I texted my nephew, and I said, I'm getting the band back together. And he's like, I'm there, when do you need me? So he has very fond memories of our preposterous Saturday nights. And so I don't know, I'm hoping I can find a fresh doorway into that to still write about such things. Yeah.
Who's your favorite member of Kiss?
Ace.
Ace.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you again. I have a follow-up question to the questions about nonfiction writing. So when I write nonfiction, I have a hard time sometimes with feeling anxious about how other people in my work are going to feel about it when they read it. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've experienced, and if it's something that someone maybe shared with you, or that you might have advice about how to handle that feeling, because I know I'm speaking my truth, but then I don't know how it's going to react with family and stuff like that.
It's probably not a surprise that I had been publishing like a decade before publishing any nonfiction. So I had avoided it for the longest time because those are very, very large questions, and I knew that it was going to be complicated with my personal life, my family life, and invading the privacy of others. And I kind of just didn't want to deal with it. So but I think when my first book came out, because it was such a novelty thing to have happened, many members of my family actually read that one. Ever since, I'm not sure, but that one they did read, just out of curiosity, I think. And so they're very, very supportive. They come to events. Like, I'm kind of surprised, like usually like one person might even make a long trek like this one. Would have been probably my sister, though, whose birthday it is tonight. But I kept thinking about it, and wrote fiction, and put things forward as fiction. And so they came to the first few events for the books, and somebody in the audience, one of the early ones, asked a question like, "How much of this is true?" And I said something like 30% or so. And my mom was in the audience, and she was like, more like 75. And it kind of broke the ice of the reality. I was not going to, if I were going to write about the complexities of that life, my life was going to bleed into it, and the lives of others as well. And I think there are things I've written that I won't ever publish. And I've given myself the permission to write them and see them through. I think you can do that, and then say, would this do more harm than good in the world beyond my desk? And that's the time you kind of answer that, and you generally think about having to live with it. And keeping that in mind, I think I've probably become a better self-editor, and in ways to work around and keeping others' privacy intact, and making myself the only liable figure in the work. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the form in which you wrote a poetic or a verse memoir. I mean, because a memoir is sort of writing about a personal experience. It kind of promises directness, and especially with yours, like there are photographs in it. It almost feels like a family album at times. But then there's a formalism of your language, and even in the one poem about the boarding school, there's even an added layer of formality, in that it's like a list, right? You've chosen to account for that as a list. And so I'm just curious, like that sort of tension, or how you reflected on the formal decision to write the memoir in that way.
Each of my books has gone through a variety of shapes as time has gone on. Like when you start or you finish a first draft of something, by the time it gets published, my books rarely look like the same book. And this one had a very long gestation period. It was like 10 years. And because in part, I did have editors who say, well, I will publish this if you do these things to it. And I said, nah, I'll just keep it on the shelf. And I waited until I found like the right person who believed in what it was I was working on. But things had changed, substantially as the time went on. I used to be very precious about the work and not edit a ton, and now I'm not. I mean, you're in service of the work. And so I go, every time I'm working on a new project, I look back at old projects that I never finished, because there are a ton of those as well. And one of them was, if you look at my work like online, you'll see that I've been exploring the Indian head nickel for most of my career, and which most people know as the buffalo nickel for some reason. I don't know, it's like the only coin in which, it's like called by its ass end rather than the head. And so in the research for it, I discovered that the artist who made the engraving chose parts of faces of 4 different indigenous men because none of them were Indian enough looking for him. Like he wanted every stereotype. So he like put all these pieces together to create like the uber Indian face. And so as I was thinking about that, and I've come back to it over and over again from different angles. And one of them, I was working on just the ideas. I never even got to the painting point of wanting to do every one of the Beatles album covers, but with 4 Indian men instead of the Beatles, because I thought, okay, they were each these kind of fragmentary personalities, and when you put them together, they created this, kind of world-changing body of music. And separately, you might love, I mean, I'm a big lover of like Wings and Band on the Run and so forth, but they never really compete with Abbey Road. Like they never individually achieved what they could have together. But then I got to the problem of the White Album. I'm like, what's an Indian painter going to do with the White Album? It just seemed too fraught, so I never really got that off the ground. And in the part of reimagining this from a different work that it was, I thought, what if I go back to that? And by then the idea of the apple had already shown up, and so we were trying to think of like what image I should put up here. So it's a self-portrait of me, probably about 10 years ago, so I was a little bit younger. Inside the Apple Records label, like so if you cut it open, it's a portrait that a friend of mine took of me, and then I just ended up painting it into these Apple images. So I thought, what if I take only the Beatles albums that were on Apple Records, which was after they had essentially bought their freedom. They weren't being controlled by EMI anymore. They could kind of do what they wanted. And it didn't last very long. It only lasted 3 albums before they had run their course. And I thought that was a useful and broad enough rubric to think about how to orchestrate this memoir. Because if you're writing a memoir, I mean, that's no matter what, it's going to be kind of expansive. And I thought, how can I control the segment breaks? And so I changed the White Album to the Red Album, for one thing. And then Abbey Road I reframed as a work called Dog Street, which is the slang name for the road I grew up on, because there were like 8,000 dogs. And there are no leash laws on the res, so if you're walking, it's kind of risky. But that's the way I grew up, and I still was a drag some days, but I still kind of believe that that's the deal. And the final released album, Let It Be, was originally a work called Get Back, and actually now they've come out with like Get Back, the documentary. And I thought that's what happens to a lot of people in my position, which is, you've gone out into the world and made some kind of life, but then you're also trying to like rebalance that with being home, and in many ways, it's challenging. You always get back kind of imperfectly. And so it seemed like a very easy, logical structure for the whole book, which was like kind of younger life, and then the year of finishing high school and leaving. Like literally, the Beatles had kind of broken up and decided to get back together to do Abbey Road, to do something polished and nice, to work with them, to work with one another again, collaboratively and collectively, so that they had a good final statement before dispersing. And so I thought, okay, so there's Dog Street, and then when I saw like Get Back was the working title of Let It Be, I thought, all right, there we go. So the image isn't up here, but the cover of Get Back was supposed to be a reimagining of the cover of their first album. So it's like the four of them leaning over this balcony. You've probably seen it before. And the recasting there, it's like my grandfather, father, oldest brother, and me. And so we're the kind of figures that are leaning over the balcony in that painting. So as I was a way of, I think Indians tend to be really portrayed as something in the past all the time. So I'm always trying to drag in contemporary culture as much as possible to say, no, still living, still breathing. And so that's, I guess if I have a signature, that's probably it. Yeah, sorry, that was a really long answer.
That's perfect for the questions that I want to ask. So I kind of have like two questions that are related. One is, I guess, so one of the things that I'm most interested in is the question of like how you see your work in terms of art and activism, right? Aesthetics and ethics, and the ways in which you see your personal story speaking to sort of a larger history, the ways in which you see that limited, different complications, complicities, obviously different tribal histories and so forth. So that's one question, but related to that, particularly with the interface of the visual and the verbal, so your work includes, one, all these documentary photographs, which are clearly sort of documents and in some sense have, obviously any photograph is framed and taken from a particular angle and placed within an album and curated and so forth. So it's a setup like any shot, right? But there's a kind of objectivity to it, like a documentary objectivity. Obviously, the art that you do is much more subjective in its framing, and in particularly intertextually framed. So I'm interested in the ways in which you see, in terms of this art and activism or story and history and kind of intertextual side of things, how you're like drawing on, say, all the Beatles references, all these popular references, all these white references as a means of connecting, but also of critiquing, of offering an alternative sort of recentering of stories and history. So that's a really like bunch of questions. Pick what you want.
Okay. I like being subversive, but not super controversial, because at different times being controversial has bit me in the ass, and I don't have a big one. It's kind of this indigenous DNA thing, and so I'd like to keep what I have, and so I tend to stick with the more mild subversion, and because I think the biggest way of combating inaccuracy is to I guess insert real life. I see so many images that are very popular. If you're going to buy indigenous art, you're probably not buying what I do because it doesn't look very Indian to you. And yet, my entire cast of people who show up in my paintings, they're people from my life, and many of whom are my family members. And I thought you could do nothing more subversive than to prove that we're still here, and so to include all these people. So I'm always engaging traditional culture and contemporary simultaneously. So, and I'm always kind of going back and forth between them, looking for that intersection. So I was trying to come up with an idea. I was stuck. I hadn't really painted in a while at one point. And I thought, geez, I really wish that there was a wampum belt or a wampum string having to do with the Three Sisters, because I was just kind of curious about that. And I have this book, it's just a wampum belt. It's like a very low budget reproduced book from earlier in the 20th century. And I opened it up and there was one, and there was like a whole fascinating story that went with it. And I thought, okay, well, there's my next idea. And I wanted to deal with this whole idea of cross-pollination. And so like it's a 3-panel painting, it's a triptych. And so one is like a still life of corn, beans, and squash. That's the traditional Three Sisters. And on the other end, I drove out to see my nieces, and I said, "Hey, would y'all like mind posing for some photographs?" And fortunately, my nieces are much more open than my siblings, and they're like, "Yeah, okay, let's do this." And so I could kind of count on them to be models and not reluctant models. And so they were on both ends, and the center is like a self-portrait, and it's got like the Indian head nickel is like where my glasses are, the front and back. And I was interested in where stories come from. Do we call the three sisters that grow as such, these vegetables, because of these three sisters? Or did we call these three sisters this because they reflect the way in which we grow these particular plants? And I love that ambiguity of playing with where ideas come from. And it started about a 10-year period of working only in purple and white, because wampum is, it exists only in purple and white beads, and so you're really forced to deal with very stripped down iconographic ideas when you're looking at wampum. So there's like a lot of things going on in this painting, and it was exciting enough that I kept going back to that method. So literally it was about a decade in which I only painted in purple and white, and I wanted to sort of ask, what does that mean to try to capture your entire culture in two colors? And so and that's very, very specific to Haudenosaunee culture, and that I used these kind of traditional images plus living family members who are indeed fulfilling those roles. And so I thought that is the most important thing you can say is we're still here. And so that's why my family shows up in so much of my work. And yet it's also fairly overtly political in many other ways. Yeah. All right. I think I have, do I have time for this last poem? Okay. So my sister knows what happens when she sends me things, that eventually it's going to wind up in some work. And so New Year's Eve, kind of late on New Year's Eve, my phone buzzed, and I looked at it. And it was this photo. Those of you who have the book, you'll see this photo. And it's the house we grew up in, which is now gone. It was lost to a fire. But from the air, and I'd never seen our house from the air, like, in my entire life. And so naturally, she knew what I was going to do with it. And so this is the book that closes, this is the poem that closes the book. On New Year's Eve, my sister sends me a photo. So, happy birthday, Jane. 1. Most photos that used to be in the red album are gone or damaged beyond desire to keep them. When fire claimed our history that not even Carlisle could steal, we crawled through rubble, ignoring firemen, warnings of falling debris and hidden embers. We found loose stacks, many burned beyond recognition, and peeled them apart. What fire didn't destroy, hoses dissolved. Our photos grew as hazy as memories. 2. Is it better to see damaged photos, faces blackened and smeared beyond recognition, or better to keep the original image stored inside your heart, where maybe you can soften edges if you want to, improve the light, or perhaps just your smile? Make your hair less warped. Erase whatever you don't like about the past with the Photoshop of your mind. 3. Because I can afford a fancy reproduction now, I talk my brother into putting on the old bat helmet, and we pose together, 2 Batmans short of a Robin. A photo we had, him making fun of me wearing the helmet, my bat belt and a bath towel tucked into the collar of his Rolling Stones t-shirt, is gone for good to flame and smoke and ash and wind. 4. After all this time, my family accepts that I will always be odd man out. I waste money finding toys I had when we all lived together, when I was the right age to still love toys. I reconstruct a past that I often wanted to leave, and reconstruct a past burned to coals one May afternoon. They pretend it isn't that weird for a man to wear a Batman leather jacket, and maybe they're just relieved I don't put the cowl on for too many people that they know of. No matter what sequence of words I write, no matter what image I reimagine, I wonder if they will ever understand this is not just an act of celebration, but a declaration of survival. We are still here, despite everything that has been taken away any moment we aren't looking. 5. Sometimes they say yes. They understand by passing along something they know will wind up in one of the monuments I have spent my lifetime imperfectly erecting. If I could rebuild our Dog Street house, who would live there? Knowing it wasn't really the same, but another inaccurate portrait of my past, where I have decided which harsh edge to soften, which memory to exhume and massage. 6. As the new year arrives, my sister sends me a black and white aerial shot, maybe taken in a helicopter or a crop duster of our house. The surrounding woods are sparse, full of walking paths to neighbors, our epic lawn more barren, giant trees, just a hint on the horizon. But this photo is so old. The porch, a freezing front room we all endured for phone privacy in high school, has yet to be built. It was my grandmother's gift to herself with the fleeting money she received for land flooded inside the reservoir. She wanted something permanent to show for her losses, but of course, she could not imagine our fire those years later. 7. I've never seen our home from the air, so tiny and insignificant on the landscape. It would seem like a circus clown car if we all left it at one time. This feels like an out-of-body experience, the kind people get when they've come close to death and somehow made their way back to tell of the trip. Maybe this is what each member of my family witnessed as they made their way along the celestial path. Maybe such a sight made it easier to force my siblings and me to become elders long before we were ready to take that responsibility on, long before we were ready to say our goodbyes. Though the house has been gone so long, only the lawn remains as proof it was there. Maybe this is what we'll see when we leave this place for Skyworld and get back one last time. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll